Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, hello, welcome. I'm Sherrilyn and I'm so glad you found me. If you're not new here, welcome back you guys. Thank you for joining me on our True Crime Wine Wednesday. I missed you guys last week. Wednesdays ain't the same without you. Okay, we are going to jump right into today's case. Today I am drinking my tea. I miss wine. I love this cup though. It says, if it requires a bra, I'm not going. And I feel like if you could just like have a catchphrase for myself, this would be it. They're overrated. So grab whatever it is that you guys are snacking on or drinking today and let's get started. I want to say a thank you to, oh my gosh, I know I'm going to pronounce your name wrong and I don't want to. I've even looked on YouTube to see if somebody has like a similar name so I can hear them say it, and I can't find one. This case was suggested by Marlena. I suck. There's an accent on the end of the E, so I know it's one of the accents. I just hate when I can't pronounce things, and it happens all the time. Especially when I know it's gonna be like a beautiful name and I've butchered it. My name used to get butchered all the time, so I understand the frustration, and now I'm that person. Today's case is a South African case. I've been getting so much love from South Africa. It's like now one of like the main places I want to go and visit. I can't thank you guys enough. So I wanted to look into a case from there for you today. And this was one that she had suggested for me. So again, I'm such a mess. I'm going to try to pronounce the cities and the names as accurately as I can, but I don't have your cool accent. The South African accent is actually one of my favorites because I feel like it's a combination of a bunch of like different ones that I love all meshed into one. But when it comes to me actually trying to pronounce it myself, yeah, you'll see. So apologies in advance, you guys. So the story today takes place in a town called Reikwestad. I believe it's a silent G. That's what Google told me. This is a small town. It's only approximately 4,000 people there. I heard there's a lot of history there, but it's not overly touristy. Usually if you pass through it, you're going to one of the other like major cities in the surrounding area. And I think it's one of those places where when people grow up there, they usually stay there. It's not somewhere you'd relocate or move to, so it's a lot of like locals who have been there for a long time. They're apparently very known for their precious stones, including tiger eye, which I found very cool because my daughter's super into like crystals and stones right now, and I think tiger eye are so beautiful. So I guess this is a place where they're very known for that. Unfortunately, this small town is now also known for the brutal murder of a family that happened on Good Friday of 2012. It was around 7 p.m. that evening when all of a sudden a 15-year-old named John Steenkamp barrels into the city in his dad's pickup truck and rushes into the police station screaming, "They've all been shot. They're all killed." He's in nothing but a t-shirt and shorts and he's covered in blood. He's obviously in hysterics, but the police are able to calm him down a little bit and they find out that the family had been on the farm. They were just watching TV. Don had got up to fix a lamp that was in the barn that was about 30 meters away from the house. He says when he arrived there, within minutes, he heard gunshots coming. So he ducked. He wasn't really sure where they were coming from, and he realizes they're coming from the house. He says he was basically paralyzed from fear for a few minutes, so he's not exactly sure how long, but he hid behind this workbench in the barn and eventually mustered up enough courage to go back to the family house. And when he got there, he found his mother, his father, and his sister all dead. This was a huge loss to the community. The Steenkamps were well known. They were known for being, jokesters and playful. They were very successful. They ran their own farm and I believe 5 others. And they were a family that was, into athletics. They were very involved in their church and community, so people knew who they were. Dion was Don's father. He's the patriarch of this family, but the baby of his family. He grew up on a very tight-knit farm as well. He had 2 older sisters, and they said that they would play with him like a little toy and pretend to be, like mamas to him. They said he looked really sweet and innocent and just like very cherub-like as a baby, but he was pretty mischievous and got into trouble. He was a stocky build, so he took full advantage of it. In high school, he joined the rugby team, and I read that he was a force to be reckoned with on the field. In university, he met his future wife, Crystal. Crystal was studying communications, and he was studying math and computer sciences. She also grew up on a farm, so she knew the ropes and was definitely a plus for him. After they got married, they actually moved closer to Dion's family so that they could both help out on the farm, and she fit perfectly into the family. And she was just known for being a really supportive wife. Her sister-in-law actually said that Crystal was also the perfect hostess. If she was ever making dinner for the family, she'd write down who came on what day and what she served so that the next time they came for a meal, she would never prepare the same meal twice. Dion was described as the gentle giant. Like I mentioned, he was quite stocky and definitely like a presence, but he wasn't like quick to lose his temper or go off the handle. If anything, his wife was the one to kind of lay down the law a little bit more, and he was much more of a prankster. In 1996, they had their first child, which was their son Don, and he was named after Dion's father. And then the following year, they completed their family by having a little girl, and they named her Marthella. And like I mentioned, they were such a loved family. They were leaders in their community. A lot of people looked up to them that knew them. The family operated 5 farms, and then Dion also coached kids a sport called tent pegging, and I believe this is really popular in South Africa. It's like an equestrian sport, and the Steenkamps really loved playing. On top of Crystal helping her husband with all the farm duties, she also turned her hobby of baking into like a little business. So she would make little pastries and stuff like that and then sell them. And from my understanding, she had built like quite a profitable little business. Church was a big thing for the family. They were very involved in their church, even the kids. Don was 15 years old, and he was a typical teen. He enjoyed hanging out with his friends. He liked to hunt with his dad. He was very active in tent pegging and a good student and very involved in helping out with his family as well. Marthella was the youngest. She was 14 years old, and she's described as absolutely exceptional. She was beautiful, but also so intelligent. She definitely had it all. She had the brains, the beauty, the athletics. She was involved in her church as well, helped her family. Just a really well-rounded kid. The two of them actually attended boarding school, so they weren't necessarily at home all of the time. I believe they tried to come home most weekends, and if they didn't come home, their parents would usually go out and see them at the school, and it's usually because they'd be involved in some sort of sports tournament, so they'd go and watch them. On the outside, they appeared to be a really typical family. Definitely not one that would ever attract crime or something horrific happening like this to them. I think even the police were a little bit unprepared and shocked when Don came to the station. Nothing like this had really happened in their town, so they didn't know what the protocol was to move forward. It sounds like when he got to the station and he was obviously in hysterics, it almost kind of put everybody else on edge, and they were just a little bit flustered. So by the time everybody, finally calms down and tries to make sense of the situation and what's going on, it's been a little bit of time. Don doesn't really have too much to give them. He never saw anything go down, he said. But what he does have is 2 weapons that he found on the property as he was leaving the farm. He ended up stopping his dad's truck, grabbing these 2 guns, and he brought them with him to the station because he was scared of whoever might possibly still being there, getting them and shooting at him as he was trying to flee. So the majority of the police station, they head to the farm, and they are hoping that whoever committed these crimes is still there, or at least they can find fresh tracks in some sort of direction to find somebody. Don stays behind with 2 officers, and eventually he makes his way to a restaurant that's across the street. The owner of that restaurant had actually seen him coming into town in absolute hysterics in his father's truck, so she brought over a cup of water with some sugar in it, and she thought he was going into shock, so she wanted to try to stabilize him a little bit. And everyone around him said he obviously did appear to be in shock. He was very spacey, completely out of it. He would just stare off in the distance, and he just kept saying, what am I going to do? How am I going to live without them? My father taught me absolutely everything. He's also traumatized that he's covered in his family's blood, so he just starts scrubbing like obsessively, trying to get it off. He says like the thought of it being on him is just tipping him over the edge. So everybody's reassuring him everything is going to be fine. We're going to find out who did this. Like, you're going to get justice. Don't worry. So as the police are going to investigate the farm, they find this abandoned truck that's quite close by, and it appears to have some blood on the side of it. I learned that in South Africa, they call trucks bakkies. Baki? Regardless, it's super cute, and I think I'm going to start calling trucks that now too. So they get out to investigate this truck a little bit closer, and they also find what appears to be blood on the steering wheel as well. So they grab some samples and they keep making their way to the farm. When they do get to the farm, they do find the family inside. Everything appears to be as Dawn said. They're all in close proximity to each other in the TV room. The TV is still on. And the whole thing just doesn't make sense. It completely appears to be an attack that happened without any ounce of warning. And as they're examining the bodies and collecting evidence, they realize that the daughter, Marthella, she appears to have extensive injuries. Her face was actually described as being almost unrecognizable of belonging to a human, whereas the parents just appeared to have been shot. So off the hop, they're wondering is she the target of this? As their neighbors started finding out what was going on, they're all shaken up because farm attacks are known to happen in areas like this. And so you would just kind of band together and be your own like neighborhood watch on the farm, because generally if something like this is going to happen and somebody comes to rob your farm, it takes the police quite a while to get there. So when you have your neighbors closer by, you know, they're like armed and ready to come and help you out. But there was no warning as to what was going on at the Steenkamp. Not to mention with a farm attack, usually it's just a robbery. They will come to the farm, they'll look for things that are easily accessible. Sometimes it'll be a vehicle that's stolen. Usually they're looking for weapons or valuables, but it didn't always happen with people on the farm. And if it did, it was like a robbery type situation. While they're looking around to see if it appears that anything was stolen, they're not finding anything. So then they start thinking, maybe it's somebody that knows them. This could be an ex-farm employee who was let go and they're really upset about it. They're not too sure, but as they're just looking around the scene, the farm attack idea is just kind of like coming and going, and it sounds like it's hitting closer to home. When they get outside and start looking around the property, they find a patch of blood. So it almost looks like somebody had left the house to try to get to Dawn and either warn them or get to a vehicle and escape. But then it appeared like whoever it was didn't actually make it to the barn and they were brought back into the house. So each step is leading with more questions than no answers. So they collect what they think they need at the farm. They head back to the station to interview Dawn again. They've given him a little bit more time to kind of process a little bit. And they want to find out if they can get a little more information. When they get back, Dawn is still at the restaurant. At this time, he's got some family there consoling him. And the investigators don't want to traumatize him too much, so they just did a few small procedures so that they could let him go, and then they asked for him to come back the next day to be questioned further. Dawn went over the same story. He didn't personally see anything. He just heard what he was trying to piece together from the barn. They took some photos of him. By this point, though, he was pretty much cleaned up because, like I mentioned, he was just in hysterics trying to get blood off of him. So they do get some photos of him. There is a little bit of dry blood. It appears he's also got a scratch on his neck, and he's swabbed on his hands for gunpowder residue, but it comes back negative. So that first day, they let him go back, be with his family, and spend the night there, and then they asked him to come back the next morning. The next day when he comes back, he goes through as much as he can remember from not only that day, but the day prior. He said that the day prior to the murders, his dad and him did some work around the house, and his mom, Crystal, and his sister, Marthella, did work in the house. He said that later on in that afternoon evening, his parents went to some friends' houses to drop off some baking, and they just hung out there for a few hours with some of their farm employees as well. And he says he didn't see anything suspicious and didn't believe Marthella had seen anything suspicious around the farm. She didn't bring anything up like a person scoping out the area or driving by doing like shady activity, nothing like that. So the morning of the murders was Good Friday, which meant the family was definitely going to church that day. After church, they had some lunch and they just went back to the farm. Don said that he went hunting for meerkat on the property and he used his father's gun, which was very normal of him to do. He said everyone in the family had access to the gun safe. The keys were either on the dresser right beside it, or the keys were like still in the safe. He said after hunting him and Marthella went horseback riding for a while. Then they cleaned her horse and then went back to the house. When they got back, he said his mom was working on the computer, so he and Marthella joined their father Dion, who was sitting on the couch watching TV. He says he remembers his mom asking him to put a computer program that she had back in the safe, so he said he went and did it, and he said when he went that time, he couldn't remember if he had locked it or not. Then around dusk, the family sat to watch Kudo in the yard, which is something they normally did. When they went back inside, they just kind of resumed position and went back to what they were doing prior to going outside together. Don said he was bored of watching TV with his dad and sister, so he got up and he went to the barn to fix a shooting lamp that had broken in there. He said he was only there for a few minutes, and then that's when he heard a series of gunshots. At first, he said he didn't even really process what was going on. It was just something loud, and then clicked all of a sudden, like, oh my gosh, it's gunshots. So that's when he hid behind a workbench, waited a couple minutes until he was like brave enough to get out and go investigate. He said he didn't even remember how long time had passed. It felt like forever, but he thinks it was only like 5 or 10 minutes. And he said when it went silent, that's when he went back to the house. When he got there, he said he saw blood as soon as he entered, and then he found his family. He said his mom and dad were on the ground and they appeared to be dead, but when he got further into the room, Marthella looked like she was trying to get up. He said she was like pulling up at him and grabbing at him, and the only thing that she said to him was, "I'm dying and I love you." He said when she fell, he realized that he was covered in her blood, so he ran to his room, he put on a new t-shirt, and he ran to the barn to grab his dad's truck. And he said as he was running, he heard more shots. So he like ducks and gets into this truck and hightails it off the farm. And as he's approaching the gate to get off, he sees these 2 guns that belong to his dad in the field. So he opens the door, he grabs them, he throws them in the truck, and as he's leaving the property, he kind of drives by where all of like the farm hands and helpers live on the property, and he just screams at them like, "Somebody's shooting, you need to get somewhere safe." And after that, that's when he flew to the police station. And a few theories in those early days were that Dion had snapped and killed his family and then himself. I read some people even brought up the idea that there was some sort of satanic ritual involving the daughter Marthella, since she appeared to have like the majority of the injuries. To investigators though, the farm attack seemed the most plausible, but they couldn't connect it. Like I said, it's usually always a robbery. You don't just go in and kill a family and then like flee, and then the 2 weapons that you've grabbed from the house you just like abandon and leave. Then one of the neighbors and a family friend came under attack when it was discovered that he had burned one of Dion's jackets that he was wearing at the scene, as well as a piece of carpet that Marthella was laying on that had blood on it. He said that once the police had completed all of their processing, those items were handed over to him to get rid of, and he didn't want to keep these items with, you know, like these family friends of his blood on it, so he burned them in a bonfire. Quickly, this case turns into a media storm because things like this don't happen in this town. I guess it was taken over by like news anchors and journalists from all over the place. But police were really quiet behind the scenes, so it almost was like media was left to become their own like super sleuths and try to provide their theories and their own investigations to the public, so that's kind of what people were going off of. Behind the scenes, detectives were making progress even though the public didn't know about it. They were pretty sure they had pieced together the sequence of events, which was important to them. They felt like Crystal was first and that she didn't see her attacker coming. She was sitting at her computer, so her back was to whoever came in and did this. Marthella, they believed, was the second to be shot because it looked like she tried to escape after that first shot. Like I mentioned, there was blood outside on the grass, and when they found Marthella inside, she did still have blades of grass on the back of her shirt. So it looked like she was either running out to warn Dawn and was dragged back in, or ran out, possibly saw somebody else standing there and ran back into the house. It also looked like she tried to call for help. The phone was off the hook and she was quite close by it. And then they thought it looked like Dion was shot after the initial shot to Marthella, and that he collapsed and it may have appeared like he had died, but he didn't. And it seemed like these 3 like initial shots happened obviously in like a really fast sequence, when they found Dion, it looked like he was either taking off or putting on his jacket. He only had one arm still in it. And it also looked like he was coming up from like a seated position, either, in the midst of standing up or maybe to confront an attacker, but didn't even like make it that far. Autopsy results show that the 2 guns that Dawn found in the field were, in fact, the 2 guns that were used on the family. It was a revolver and a rifle, and they discovered Dion was shot 3 times, Crystal was shot 2 times, and Marthella was shot 4 times, on top of what appeared to be a brutal attack on her. She had defensive wounds all over her arms and hands, showing she was in a clear struggle. And then Marthella's autopsy also showed signs of a sexual assault. So the theory that she was the target of what had happened to this family was becoming more and more clear. Unfortunately, though, there was no DNA left behind. Once people in the town found out that there was a sexual assault, they started getting really angry with investigators. They're feeling like now their family's even more unsafe, and is this like a serial targeter who's doing this, to young girls, and their daughters are at risk. But without anything to go on by investigators and just the media, and people start believing that Don was involved. His friends and family didn't feel the same as the public. He had a lot of supporters behind him. Even the coach that coached his tent pegging team offered to become his guardian, brought him into his home around his family because he felt so sure like he had nothing to do with this. His coach / now guardian even encouraged him to enter a tent pegging competition, which he did to distract himself. He rode his sister's horse and they run the competition. It was like this big thing. But although that tent pegging family and teammates supported him, his school didn't. He was actually asked to leave the school and had to go through this whole court battle to try to fight for his rights to get back in. He briefly was let back in because the argument was that, the speculation going on about him was coming from the media and not from investigators themselves. But that changed on August 21st, which was about 5 months after the murders. Don was arrested for the murders of his family at his school at Gray's College. Obviously, this caught his family and all of his supporters off guard. I even read that when police came to confiscate further evidence at family houses, they completely lost their minds. They were accusing them of framing Don. I also read that racial tensions were really prevalent in this case. It was insinuated early on that it was a black man that had carried out these murders. So anybody that stood behind Don was really pushing that narrative. So he was given a bail hearing, and then at that hearing, his whole entire family, his coaches, his friends, they all backed him up. They said he attended school like normal during the week. He was always at their house on weekends. They saw no suspicious behavior whatsoever, and surely nothing that suggested he was capable of doing something so horrific. During this bail hearing, there was a social worker that had worked with Don, and they also vouched that they had, done interviews with him, and they didn't see anything that, raised alarm bells that he was a threat to the public. Later on, it was brought up that the social worker was actually related to Don's defense attorney. So it's total conflict of interest, but it went through. And then the lead investigator, who up until this point had no public interviews, didn't share any of the findings that were going on behind the scenes, spoke. He said what they were gathering was that there was no proof that anybody besides Don was involved. They found no DNA from anybody besides the family at the scene. It was brought up that the Steenkamps had employees that lived on the property, but again, not even any of their DNA was in the house. He said that when they were doing their investigation around the house, they had found the bloody t-shirt that Don said he changed in his bedroom, and when they looked at it, it was covered in blood, but it was also heavily ripped around the neck area. So with the autopsy results showing that Marthella had been sexually assaulted, to them this looked like proof of a struggle, and probably how he got the scratch that was on his neck when he was photographed the first night. Although the child justice court system in South Africa is very favorable for children, he was denied immediate bail, and it was pushed back to an application process. I think that process only took about a week though, and during that time his family was still able to come and visit him in jail, I think up to 3 times a day, bring him his own clothes, socks, bedding, home-cooked meals, fast food, like the whole shebang. The application ended up being reviewed after about 10 days. Ultimately, it was decided that he wasn't a flight risk. It basically came down to the fact that although he was the only suspect, he was still living his life like normal. He had been in houses up until this point with access to guns, and like nothing had happened. So they thought that it was important that he carry on his education. He was released on bail, and the family only had to pay 5,000 rands, which I believe only converted to like $430 Canadian. So one of the main reasons he's released, they say, is so that he can carry on his education. But again, the school is like, all right, well, we've already like done this song and dance. You've already been let go, fought to come back in. Now you're supposed to come back in, but there's even more possible evidence that you're involved in this somehow. Like, we don't want you here. So prior to a murder trial happening, he goes to trial again to fight for his rights. And they were eventually able to come to an agreement where he wouldn't necessarily be on campus, but he almost did like a homeschooling thing, and then he would go and drop off his assignments at the school. It's really very interesting how much the South African court system favors children. And not necessarily in a bad way. I mean, I believe that there's so many cases where something like that is really important. I had read about it briefly before researching this case, but this one really kind of brought to light like all of the measures and the extents they go to make sure that they don't get incarcerated, and give them like the possibility to just like rehabilitate and not be somebody who's just going to be stuck in the system spending their life in prison. And maybe that's why the town was also very split. Like, you definitely had the supporters that, you know, believed that he didn't have anything to do with it at all, and then the other side was just like, lock him up and throw away the key. While he was waiting for trial, it almost turned him into like some sort of celebrity also. Girls like his age kind of were really drawn to him and fixated on this like potential of him being like a bad boy. And it seemed like he was quite receptive to this. Like early on in the investigation, he was like this timid, unsure, scared boy. And then all of a sudden he was carrying himself with like all this confidence and flashy clothes. So on March 11th, 2013, it's just under a year since the murder, the trial starts. My understanding is that jury trials have been abolished in South Africa since 1969. So this case was presented in front of a judge. Prosecution started by laying out the crime scene. They explained how his sister appeared to be the primary motive of the attack. And they brought up that although Don's hands had tested negative for gunpowder residue that first day at the police station, when they tested his clothing, the clothes came back positive. Although the autopsy results had shown that Marthella had endured a attack, the public actually didn't know about this yet. It wasn't until the trial that was the first time it was ever confirmed. Up until that point, it was only speculated through the media. So now everybody officially finds out that she was assaulted, and it appeared to be about 24 to 12 hours before the murders. The prosecution's theory was that when Dion and Crystal had gone to their friend's house the day prior to the murders, Don and Marthella were alone. He had raped her, and in fear that she would tell somebody, he had to eliminate the possibility of anybody ever finding out. They believed the murders happened sometime between 6:34 and 6:54 p.m. because Crystal had sent a text message to her sister at 6:34, and then Dawn arrived at the police station at 6:54. So that was like a 20-minute window of time plus travel time to get to the station. And the time frame just didn't fit Dawn's story of hiding in the barn for 10 minutes. I believe the time test to get to the farm from the station was like 7 minutes. So it left like 3 minutes total, which really isn't a lot of time to run back to the house, find your family, have this last embrace with your sister, change your clothes, run back to the barn, get the truck, stop to get the guns, warn people on the property, and drive to the police station. The defense really had not much of a leg to stand on. The only thing they really could bring up that they thought was going to impose any reasonable doubt was that originally investigators said there was no other DNA found at the crime scene. And they found out later that there were some glasses that were outside in the braai area. My understanding is a braai is like a barbecue, which is like a very popular thing to do with family and friends in South Africa. So one of these glasses in that braai area had an unidentified fingerprint on it. And they're like, well, that obviously could belong to somebody who was visiting the family earlier on. But it was really quickly shut down because A, Don didn't mention anybody coming earlier and didn't say that he had seen somebody like that. And B, Marthella's fingerprints were actually never even taken before she was cremated. So there's a possibility that it actually belonged to her. So the reasonable doubt turned into like no reasonable doubt at all. I mean, laying this all out here, it seems like everything's really cut and dry, but the trial took forever. It started in March and it was only slated to last 4 weeks. It turned out it wasn't enough time to get through all of the witnesses, do the cross-examination. So it ended up being postponed all the way until September. And then when September arrived, it was postponed till October because in that time frame, Don's grandfather, who had been paying for all of his lawyer fees, had passed away from the stress of everything that was going on, and his executors, which were his daughters, refused to put more money into the trial and the defense. It was like a whole production, and trial didn't resume until November that year. When things started back up, the truck that was initially found at the very beginning of the investigation was finally addressed. Originally, they thought it belonged to somebody who had fled the scene and left their blood behind from some attack, but it actually ended up belonging to one of the employees of the Steenkamp farm. That evening, when Don had gone to warn them of somebody being on the property, they gathered their things and they left the farm in this truck, but as they were leaving, the truck broke down, and then when the driver went to go and fix the exhaust pipe, I believe he cut himself on that, and then when he went back into the truck, he left like his own blood behind. That appeared to be like the only last piece of reasonable doubt for Don. The defense tried to use the t-shirt that was in his bedroom as proof that, you know, like his story was accurate. They said that it proved that Don's story made sense because Marthella was grasping at him and pulling on his t-shirt, and that's how he got the scratch. And then when she collapsed to the floor, it was the weight of her, you know, already holding onto his shirt and pulling it down that ripped it. But the medical examiner said with the wounds that she sustained, she would have never had the strength to even like barely move, let alone have like upper body strength and a grip to like really like tear and pull a t-shirt to the degree that it was. They said it was definitely more consistent with being involved in an attack and sustaining those injuries as that's all happening. There were several different bloodstains on the t-shirt too. One of them even matched the outline of the gun, almost like resting on his shoulder. And also different patterns of Marthella's blood, suggesting that he was, you know, in close proximity to her when she was receiving like several different blows. So it just didn't make sense that he had this like one last embrace. It would have all been pulled together instead of coming at completely different directions. Then they started talking more about the guns, and when I was reading about that, I was so disturbed. The two guns were part of what led investigators to that series of events that they had unfolded prior. They said first, all three family members would have had those initial shots from the revolver, and every one of them would have been non-fatal. For the parents, though, it seemed to incapacitate them, so they couldn't do anything besides just lay on the floor and hear what was going on. And I can't imagine what that would have been like, laying there, hearing this attack on your daughter, not being able to do anything, hearing there's an opportunity that she had when she fled to go and get help, and then being aware that she's brought back into the house and no one's coming. It was after Marthella came back to the house that the revolver was grabbed from the safe. That was the weapon that delivered the final shots. The defense tried to say that, oh, you know, the guns were really easily accessible. It doesn't just necessarily mean that it was Don because he was in the house, but it just doesn't make sense. Like, somebody who's coming to do like a farm attack, if that was what they were pushing on everybody, they would come prepared. They're not going to be like, I really hope that there's going to be some guns there. And then you find the guns and you don't leave with anything, you just kill somebody. Not to mention, in order to get to the weapons, this intruder would have had to come through the back door that they would just assume is open because there was no evidence of forced entry in the front, and that front lock was still locked when the investigators came to find the family. So they're saying that this person came through the back door, and then not only that, they would have had to walk through that front room that the family was all watching TV and Crystal was working on her computer at, just nonchalantly walk in front of them, get to the safe without anybody moving, and then come out and attack them. Nothing pointed to anybody else besides Don. He was even basically implicating himself on that first day while he was waiting for the investigators to do their initial search, and he was at the restaurant. He was texting with a friend saying that he was their main suspect, and this was before that they had even come back and photographed and did like a brief questioning on him. I learned that he never even once asked if anybody was caught, if they found anything that was leading to somebody. The only question he asked investigators was if he was going to inherit his family's money. So the trial wraps up with Marthella's rape being the main motive of the crime. Don himself was the one that put only him and Marthella on the farm that day before the crimes happened. He said he had no recollection of Marthella meeting with a friend of hers on the farm. All of the farmhands that also were on the property were with Dion and Crystal at their friend's house hanging out together. So it was really only the two of them there, and Don was the one who put them both there together alone. Although there was no DNA that tied him to it, it didn't mean that he wasn't the one who did it. It wasn't like, oh, there was some DNA and it didn't match him. There was no DNA period for anybody, which means one, there was a condom that was used, or two, there was no ejaculation. Right when you think everything's going to wrap up and all of the evidence is there and it's case closed, nothing was easy in this case, and Don and his supporters obviously knew it wasn't looking good for him. So right before the verdict was read, it was announced that Don had fired his lawyers. So now the trial got re-delayed and he was able to stay out on bail, celebrate Christmas, celebrate the New Year. And then when things picked back up, this new lawyer asked for a new trial. So the judge was basically like, okay, yeah, on what grounds? The new lawyer tried to argue that the evidence that brought forward wasn't like clear. And the judge was pissed. He was like, seriously, we've delayed all of this for this. Like, it was extremely clear. Everything was, laid out black and white. There was zero gray area. And they didn't even bring a new witness, new evidence, a new expert, nothing. Finally, after almost a year of trial, Don was found guilty and he was sentenced to 76 years in prison. He got 20 years for each murder, plus 12 for the attack on Marthella, and 4 for lying to police. The twist, though, is that he's actually able to serve it all together, so he only needs to spend that 20 years for those crimes. And I guess with the child laws in South Africa, there's a possibility that he can actually be released by only serving 50% of that time. I also learned that when he is released, he'll still inherit his family's trust, which is just, whew. I mean, I thought Canadian laws were lax. It's quite shocking that there wasn't any heavier restrictions or an example made out of him. And he really was able to take advantage of how much the court system just wants to believe in children. But I mean, I feel like when those laws were made, it wasn't in committing these crimes and killing your entire family and your sister. I really am all for exploring all measures and just not using the system as a let's lock you away and throw away the key type thing. If there is rehabilitation possible there, I think that's really important. But there are just some people out there that, I don't know if you're capable of rehabilitation. My personal opinion is that I don't think that he is one of them. There was actually something that I read that kind of tied into that at trial. So it was after these crimes were committed, after Don's aware that, he's going on trial and he's potentially going to go to jail for these crimes. And it's going to be brought up that he's clearly got a problem with sexual urges. he's got all eyes on him, and he sees this like beautiful reporter walk in, and I guess like he obviously was staring at her, and then she left the courtroom, I think, to go, I'm not sure, perhaps go to the bathroom, but then he made an excuse to like go and get water and like follow her. So when I read that, I was just like, it's a little problematic. It seemed like obviously there was like impulses there that maybe he's not able to control, on top of the fact that like you did this to your sister. I can't imagine. You guys will have to let me know your thoughts on having more like lax laws for children and give them a chance for rehabilitation, and you know what that kind of looks like in these types of cases where it's not always just like a one size fits all. That is it for me today, you guys. Thank you so much for coming by and hanging out. If you haven't already, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It means the world to me, and I love and I appreciate you so, so much. I will see you next Wednesday, and I will miss you terribly. Until then, make sure to love each other, love yourself, and I will see you soon. Bye.